The Beginner's Guide is a 2015 storytelling video game by Davey Wreden. It's one of my favorite single-player games that I've ever played, and you shouldn't play it. There's a lot of things I could spend a lot of time talking about in relation to The Beginner's Guide, like how playing through the game a second time after you know what Davey's done turns it into almost psychological horror as you second-guess what's real and what's not, or how releasing shortly after Undertale was a giant coincidence in the game's development cycle that ended up massively furthering the game's themes, or how the choice to name Coda Coda might make the game about 4 different versions of the same person, but I simply don't have the time to. Instead, I think I need to focus in on how The Beginner's Guide is a game that is almost entirely about hypocrisy. Every single plot point or theme in The Beginner's Guide manages to contradict itself in some way at some point in the plot. I'm just gonna list off a bunch here because this whole game is built on them and they're everywhere. When the twist happens, you realize that the games you've been playing through do not reflect on Coda's mindset, but they almost certainly reflect on Davey the character's mindset, despite the fact that the reason this plot exists is that Coda is mad that Davey thought he could see Coda through his games, and now we might be able to see Davey through his. In that same plot twist, it comes forth that one of the ways that Davey has ruined Coda's games is that he's been guiding and talking you through them on your first playthrough. You'd think The Beginner's Guide would be immune from that criticism, given that it speaks out against it, but it's totally not. The fact that I've spoken about this game in the way that I have has probably completely ruined it for you if you haven't played it already. Davey argues with Coda as to whether or not Coda's games are playable, but he chooses to release Coda's story through a game that not only advertises itself as having no objective or goal, but actively spites the player for having played it afterward. I mean, Wreden put this game out under the company name Everything Unlimited Limited, for goodness sake. It's all hypocrisy all the way down. To continue, in a game about trying to see a creator through their work, Davey somehow manages to completely miss the connections to himself that he makes in the process. Almost every single one of Davey's interpretations refers to himself or the events of the game. There's some that immediately fit into the plot, like Davey's interpretation of the teacher game foreshadowing himself as the villain.
And suddenly, you discover that your teacher is just as bigoted and afraid as you are.
And some that fit more into how the player is supposed to react, like when he talks about hating to see someone so trapped.
I was watching him do this to himself, and I hated it. I hated seeing him so trapped.
Here's some examples.
If your role here is not to understand, then what is it? There's a bigger picture that all of his games are meant to play a role in, some larger meaning that we won't be able to grasp until we've seen all of them. I see this person who's filled with thoughts and feelings and beliefs and has no way to express them except as scattered and unheard voices in a game that wasn't meant to be played. Personally, I think it's awful to watch this, to see a person basically unraveling through their work. And for what? Like, at what point do you just go, maybe there are game ideas other than this prison that I could be working on? He just keeps backing away from possible connections to anyone other than himself. You can't be the one writing both the questions and the answers. Then there's no movement. Then there's no circulation. If all of your anxieties are being channeled into your work, then if the work ever fails, you have no backup and you're just going to crash. Because now he wants something to hold on to. He wants a reference point. He wants the work to be leading to something. He wants a destination.
Davey also seems to miss the fundamental point of every single one of Coda's metaphors, going as far as to paint the black space between the doors, which Coda explicitly says is peaceful and nice more than once, as a painful space, even deciding to stick the most emotionally painful part of the game within that black space. Davey's misunderstandings of Coda's work even go as far as to miss the point of entire games. If you look at the Island game and the Machine game in the context of Davey and Coda's relationship, the former becomes a game about how pressure from Davey to stay happy and creative is burning him out, and the latter is about how Davey is showing Coda's creations and pressuring him to make more games, despite the fact that he clearly doesn't want either of those things to happen. Only after a completely unplayable game does Davey get it, and even then, that has to be spelled out to him.
He's never been this explicit in his work about exactly what he's thinking. So where's that coming from?
I don't know, you freaking tell me! I would even wager that Davey misses Coda's points so hard that he misgenders her the whole game. I mean, if Coda was a recluse and did all of this work by herself, like Davey alleges, how did she make the voiceover present in Whisper Machine without at least being assigned female at birth?
That being is powering the whisper machine.
There's also the problem of me making this video. As someone who lives with clinical depression, when I first played the beginner's guide, I found myself relating to its contents, especially the breakdown Davey has at the end, which was a weird feeling to deal with, because the beginner's guide is a game that does everything in its power to stop you from doing that. I mean, I even showed the game to people, for goodness sake. For a while, I was the villain in Davey's story. The Beginner's Guide is a game that compels you to become the villain of the plot after you finish playing it, which is a weird and huge contradiction. These contradictions all merge to form a work that is meaningless, no matter how I look at it, and yet, I can't even say that about the Beginner's Guide, because this meaninglessness, when combined with the game's themes, manages to give the piece meaning. Art can be meaningless and hypocritical and unsure about itself, and that's okay. Which again, is a contradiction, that a piece can be meaningless and have meaning at the same time, but here we are. Okay, this next bit's going to be a bit of a reach. And not only is it a bit of a reach, it's a bit of a reach that kind of flagrantly goes in the face of the game's themes, and is probably a thought that I should have thrown away a long time ago. I'll give you a few seconds to make a game theory joke now so you can get it out of your system. Okay, you ready? There's this one voice line in the game that I haven't been able to place, because it doesn't really seem to be a direct reference to anything.
And then he hits on something. And he likes it. And that's it. He's done. He stops making prisons.
And, of course, this could just be a red herring inserted by Reedon, because that fits, but potential meanings of this have been stuck in my mind, and I feel like this line might refer to something in Coda's writing, but that feels too vague and too flimsy. It feels stronger to me if this is what happens to Davey after he finishes narrating the Beginner's Guide. Maybe what happens after he truly realizes what Coda has written. And when combined with the themes of audience and creator, that makes me think that Reedon is never making another game ever again. I think we ruined it for him. I think he slaved over this game and then it clicked, and then he was done. I think making a game about anxiety as to why a creator stopped making confusing games, and in the process making a game that ends up being as confusing as Coda's games, might have been a giant middle finger from Davey to his audience. This is his tower, a game that actively doesn't want to be played, that ends up just being confusing most of the time. A coda, after all, is the ending piece to a musical work. God, we're evil.